Hello, my name is Lisa Thompson and I am an Adult Safeguarding Review Chair and author. Thank you for joining this short session which will outline the case of Elizabeth Eastley and discuss learning which has arisen from the review of her death. Elizabeth Eastley was 72 years old when she was found deceased in her self-contained sheltered accommodation flat. She had lived in the accommodation for just over a year and had been allocated the property following an application for housing via the homeless route. Very little was known about Elizabeth when she applied for housing. She did not have a GP, her previous settled address was in another county and had been from decades before, and she'd been using a PO box address in a third county for many years. Most of the questions about Elizabeth's past, how and why she came to be in Kent, remains a mystery. What we do know about Elizabeth is that she had lived at a hotel for over 8 years, and when this was sold following the death of the owner, Elizabeth was rehoused temporarily in another hotel by the local housing team. This was while her application for housing was progressed. She was at this second hotel for 18 months. The hotel manager and the manager of the scheme which Elizabeth used for her postal address both described her as educated, well-spoken, very secretive, and they both wondered if she'd been involved in working overseas during her working life. Following her death, no family were identified. However, everyone who had come into contact with her remembered her and described her fondly. During the 18 months when Elizabeth was living in temporary accommodation at the hotel, she wrote regularly to the homeless and housing option teams. These letters became increasingly confused in nature. Although it is quite normal for a homeless person to reside in temporary accommodation for 18 months, it is thought that there were some unnecessary delays due to Elizabeth's lack of understanding of the progress of the process. This can be evidenced by the letters she was writing the manager of the hotel where she was housed. These letters indicated that she thought she was expected to pay for the room herself and that she thought she was going back to her original hotel once it had been renovated. Elizabeth was reluctant to move to the scheme which she had been allocated via home choice. She stated in a letter to the homeless officer that she wouldn't be staying for long, so didn't want to take up a property which someone else could have had. There is no indication that the housing team were concerned by any of the letters that they received from Elizabeth. She was described by them as being well-spoken and possibly eccentric. And although she didn't appear to understand the homeless process, she refused any help to offer her that was offered to her. As the letters became more confused, the housing team continued to scan and save them to their system. No safeguarding concerns were raised about Elizabeth's state of mind. If a safeguarding concern had been raised by the housing team, Elizabeth would have been contacted. Potentially, there would have been a visit to the hotel. At this point, her confused state of mind may have been identified as requiring a social care referral or mental health support. However, it could also have provided information which could have been used to determine more suitable accommodation than the residential scheme where she was eventually housed. After Elizabeth moved into this scheme, she sent a letter of a very concerning nature. However, as she'd already been housed and her application closed, this letter was scanned and filed by the post room and did not reach the housing team. It has been confirmed that if this letter had been read by a member of the housing team, it would have led to a safeguarding concern being raised at that point. This was a missed opportunity to raise a safeguarding concern. A safeguarding referral at this early stage may have resulted in a mental capacity test, or findings from an adult social care assessment may have fed into the process used to determine suitable accommodation. As soon as Elizabeth did move into her permanent accommodation at the housing scheme, she began to write daily to the scheme manager. Sometimes she would send multiple letters in a day. She wrote that she was expecting money from her solicitor, that she believed herself to be living in a hotel and that she was only there temporarily, and that she would pay the hotel bill once money from her solicitors came through. The scheme manager contacted the solicitor, who confirmed that they did not represent Elizabeth. However, they'd also been receiving letters from her, and they were also concerned about her well-being. At the housing scheme, Elizabeth slept in the communal living room. Her bed remained unslept in, and her belongings remained in boxes in her sparse room. She took food from the communal fridge and left notes to ask for the food to be added to her hotel bill. She would also knock on residents' doors throughout the night, which led to many complaints. The scheme manager was concerned that Elizabeth refused to register with the local GP, and her refusal to accept any help from either the scheme manager or other services, which would have, for example, helped to furnish her flat. One day, after living at the scheme for 9 months, Elizabeth sat outside the scheme with all of her belongings, telling the scheme manager that she was waiting for her driver to pick her up and to take her to another local hotel. She'd written to the scheme manager previously to advise that she was moving and that she would pay her outstanding bill soon. The combination of all the scheme manager's concerns led her to make a referral to adult social care, which in turn led to a referral into KMPT's Community Mental Health for Older People scheme. Over the next 3 months, KMPT met with Elizabeth on 4 occasions and identified that she also required support with her social care needs. They arranged a joint visit with adult social care. However, on the day of the appointment, Elizabeth cancelled this meeting. Elizabeth was found deceased in her flat 18 days later, having not been seen in person by any scheme staff for 10 days. The property which Elizabeth lived in was not for people with complex or high needs. It was not supported accommodation, and the referral to adult social care which the scheme manager made when she realised Elizabeth needed additional care and support needs was correct practice. Once the referral had not been actioned in a manner that the scheme manager deemed proportionate to her concerns, she could have utilised the Kent and Medway Safeguarding Adult Board's escalation policy. This policy makes it clear that whenever a practitioner, agency or service has a concern about the action or inaction of another, this may be addressed and any challenge is conducted in a professional and respectful manner. Practitioners and managers should always be prepared to review decisions and plans with an open mind. This policy provides a 4-stage framework for challenging decisions. The first stage of this is to escalate the concern to a team manager, who must provide a written response to the concerns within 5 days. The policy provides for 3 further stages of escalation if the response is still not deemed sufficient by the referrer. Knowing that this policy and process exists could have empowered the scheme manager to challenge the adult social care and mental health team's decisions. A recommendation from this review and other reviews is for agencies and individuals to develop their legal literacy, to have an understanding of the legislation available and policies which are in place. Elizabeth should have been recognised as a vulnerable person with intervention needs. An overarching theme of this review is that in responding to Elizabeth's needs, there is a distinct lack of utilisation of current legislation and policy. Elizabeth was not subject to a care needs assessment required under the Care Act. Her capacity was not assessed as required under the Mental Capacity Act, and the Kent and Medway self-neglect policy was not followed. The Mental Capacity Act general principles include that a person must be assumed to have capacity until it is assessed that they do not have capacity, and that a person is not to be treated as unable to make a decision merely because they have made an unwise decision. It may have been that Elizabeth's capacity was never brought into question due to her eloquence and presentation. She appeared to be eccentric and fiercely independent, rather than lacking capacity due to a disturbance in the functioning of the mind or brain. However, it is clear from the letters which she had been writing to professionals, including hotel staff, that although she appeared to be functioning well, she was somewhat delusional, and this became increasingly evident once she moved into the scheme. Assessments for mental capacity should include a functional assessment, requiring a separate assessment of capacity in respect of each decision to be made. So in Elizabeth's case, she was clearly capable of caring for herself on the day-to-day. However, her decision-making was based upon her belief that she was living in a hotel, that she had somewhere else to be, and once her solicitor or her friend came through with her money, she would be back to travelling. From what we know about her history, travel and living in various hotels was her norm. Therefore, it may have been that she was living in the past. Her decision not to register with the local GP was based upon the belief that she would soon be leaving Kent. There are clear links between capacity and self-neglect, and in Elizabeth's case, there was no assessment to determine whether one or other of these issues was a factor in her life. Had Elizabeth been assessed and deemed to have capacity, her refusal to register with a local GP and her refusal to accept support from any agencies may have been evidence that she was self-neglecting. The Kent and Medway self-neglect policy supports the identification of self-neglect and also provides a process which any agency can follow if self-neglect is suspected. Elizabeth Eastley was an articulate, well-presented, but very private woman. It is very possible that her presentation masked her vulnerabilities. Elizabeth's story provides an opportunity to remind agencies of KCC's escalation policy and to raise awareness of mental capacity and also, to a lesser extent, self-neglect. Elizabeth's review is available on the Kent and Medway Safeguarding Adult Board website. Here you can also view many other safeguarding adult reviews and all of the policies and processes that have been discussed in this session. Thank you for listening.